The Midway Motel sat on Interstate 80 like a festering sore on a grey asphalt spine. It was exactly 312 miles from Omaha and exactly 312 miles from Denver. It didn't belong to a town, a county, or a zip code that anyone gave a damn about. It was just there, a jagged cluster of neon tubes buzzing in the high plains darkness, bleeding an angry tubercular pink into the night. Midway Motel. Vacancy. Colour TV. The O in Motel was burned out, making it look like a sputtering plea, M-tell, M-tell, tell. Arnie Vance gripped the steering wheel of his 2003 Crown Victoria, feeling the vibration of the road numbing his hands. He was tired in that deep, marrow-aching way that sleep never quite fixed. The dashboard clock read 11:42 p.m. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, smearing a fine, misty drizzle across the glass. Beside him, on the passenger seat, illuminated by the dashboard's sickly green glow, was a manila folder. Inside the folder was an 8x10 glossy of a man named Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was a regional sales manager for a company that manufactured industrial adhesives. He had thinning hair, a weak chin, and eyes that looked perpetually apologetic. He also had a wife named Janice, who had sat in Arnie's cramped, cigarette-stinking office 3 days ago, crying into a balled-up Kleenex. "He wouldn't just leave, Mr. Vance," she had said, her voice trembling with that terrible, fragile certainty of the abandoned. "He's not a runner. We were planning a trip to Branson. He called me from his car, said he was stopping for the night. That was 2 weeks ago." The police had found Arthur's beige Toyota Camry abandoned on the shoulder of I-80, out of gas and covered in a fine layer of Nebraska dust. The last ping on Arthur Pendleton's Visa card had been at a Gulf station 40 miles back, but the last place his cell phone had registered a tower was right here. Arnie flipped the turn signal, a harsh, rhythmic tink-tink, tink-tink in the quiet car, and pulled onto the gravel shoulder, the Crown Vic's shocks groaning in protest as they hit the uneven dirt lot of the Midway. The place was a single-story L shape of cinder-block rooms painted the colour of dried mustard. The doors were a faded, peeling turquoise. A few cars were scattered across the lot, a rusted-out Ford F-150, a Dodge Caravan with a tarp over the rear window, a muddy Peterbilt idling near the far edge. Transients, ghosts passing through the American arteries. Arnie killed the engine. The silence of the plains washed over him, broken only by the angry BZ of the neon sign. He grabbed his trench coat, checked the Smith & Wesson .38 in his shoulder holster out of sheer habit, and stepped out into the damp chill. The motel office smelled of stale Folgers, Pine Sol, and ancient cigarette smoke, the holy trinity of cheap lodging. A window air conditioning unit rattled in the wall, fighting a losing battle against the encroaching autumn cold. Behind the counter stood a man who looked like he had been constructed out of beef jerky and spare parts. He wore a faded flannel shirt and had a lazy left eye that seemed to be watching a fly on the ceiling, while his right eye fixed on Arnie. "Help you!" the man rasped. His voice sounded like boots crunching over dead leaves. "Need a room," Arnie said, sliding a $50 bill onto the Formica counter. "Just for the night." The old man didn't move toward the money. "We got rooms. Cost you 40. Cash only." "I can do that." Arnie pulled his PI badge from his pocket and flipped it open. The gold shield caught the harsh fluorescent light. "I also need some information. Looking for a guy. Came through here about 2 weeks ago." Arnie slid the 8x10 of Arthur Pendleton across the counter. The old man looked at the photo. His expression didn't change, not a twitch. "Don't know him." "You sure?" His phone pinged off the tower down the road. "This is the only place to stop for 50 miles in either direction." "Lot of folks stop," the man said, sliding a heavy leather-bound guest ledger across the counter. He handed Arnie a cheap plastic pen. "They sleep, they piss, they get back on the road. I don't look at their faces much. Sign here, name and make of your car." Arnie sighed, signing Arnold Vance, Ford Crown Vic. "You don't happen to have a computerized system, do you? Something I could look at?" "No computers, just the book." Arnie glanced down at the open page. The entries were sparse, written in a variety of scrawls. His eyes drifted up the page to an entry dated 14 days ago. A. Pendleton, Toyota, room 114. Arnie's heart did a slow, heavy thump against his ribs. He tapped the page with a thick index finger. "Right there, he stayed here, room 114. The old man leaned over, his lazy eye drifting wildly. "Guess he did. Paid cash. Left the next morning. I didn't see him go. Key was in the drop box." "I want that room," Arnie said. The old man frowned, the deep canyons of wrinkles on his face collapsing into a scowl. "Room 114 is taken. Got a guy in there now. Salesman." "Move him." "Ain't moving him." "You want a room? I got 108 or 112. Arnie reached into his wallet, pulled out another 50 and laid it next to the first. $100 says 114 is suddenly vacant. Call him. Tell him there's a plumbing leak. I don't care." The old man stared at the money. A strange, wet sound rattled in his throat. It took Arnie a second to realize it was a chuckle. "Ain't nobody in there anyway," he muttered, picking up the bills with fingers that looked like gnarled roots. "Just messing with you. Room 114, down the end, near the ice machine. Don't break nothing." He tossed a heavy brass key onto the counter. The metal tag was stamped with a deeply grooved 114. Arnie took the key. "Appreciate the hospitality." As Arnie turned to leave, the old man spoke again. "It gets quiet out here at night, mister. Real quiet. If you wake up and hear things, it's just the pipes. The plumbing's old. Everything here is old." Arnie didn't answer. He pushed out into the damp night, the heavy door groaning shut behind him, cutting off the fluorescent glare. Room 114 was at the far end of the L shape, tucked away in the deepest shadow of the overhang. The ice machine nearby was a rusted metal sarcophagus, humming aggressively but producing no ice. Arnie jammed the key into the lock. It stuck for a moment, then turned with a heavy, satisfying click. He pushed the door open, feeling for the light switch. Fluorescence flickered to life, revealing a room that time had forgotten, and then deliberately tried to erase. The carpet was a burnt orange shag that looked like a diseased pelt. The bedspread was a floral monstrosity of browns and yellows, stiff with cheap detergent. On the wall hung a faded print of a mountain range that looked vaguely European and entirely depressing. A heavy Zenith television sat on a bolted-down dresser. Beside the bed on a scuffed nightstand was a digital clock radio. The red LED digits read 12:05 a.m. Arnie stepped inside, closed the door, and threw the deadbolt. He engaged the chain for good measure. He dropped his bag on the luggage rack and began to toss the room. He didn't know what he was looking for. A ransom note? A bloodstain? Arthur Pendleton hadn't been the kind of man to invite violence. He sold glue. He liked birdwatching. Arnie checked the drawers, empty save for a Gideon Bible that smelled of mildew. He checked the closet. 2 wire hangers swung on a wooden dowel, clinking faintly. He went into the bathroom. Seafoam green tiles, a sink with rust stains radiating from the drain like brown spiderwebs, a toilet wrapped in a paper strip that read, "Sanitize for your protection." Nothing. Arthur Pendleton was gone. Arnie went back into the main room, took off his trench coat and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sagged heavily in the middle, a crater formed by 1,000 exhausted bodies over half a century. He pulled a silver flask from his suit pocket and took a long hit of cheap bourbon. It burned on the way down, settling like a warm coal in his stomach. "You're chasing ghosts, Arnie," a voice in his head whispered. It sounded a lot like his ex-wife Sarah, always chasing people who don't want to be found. "Shut up, Sarah," Arnie muttered to the empty room. He kicked off his shoes, leaving his clothes on, and lay back on the stiff floral bedspread. He stared at the ceiling, tracing the water stains that looked like distorted faces. The neon sign outside buzzed. The ice machine rumbled. The highway in the distance offered the occasional reassuring Doppler shift roar of a passing semi-truck. Arnie closed his eyes. Just a quick nap. At first light, he'd go out and walk the perimeter, check the dumpsters, talk to the trucker if he was still there. The exhaustion pulled him under fast, dragging him down into a thick, dreamless dark. Arnie woke with a sudden violent gasp, his body jerking on the mattress as if he'd been hit with a defibrillator paddle. He sat up, his hand instantly darting to the .38 in his holster. His heart was hammering a frantic bird-like rhythm against his ribs. He blinked, trying to clear the sleep from his eyes. The room was bathed in a suffocating, heavy grey light. It wasn't the harsh fluorescent glare, and it wasn't the bleeding pink neon from outside. It was a flat, dead illumination, like the sky right before a tornado hits. Arnie swung his feet over the side of the bed. Something was wrong. The silence, it was absolute. It wasn't just quiet, it was an active, aggressive absence of sound. The neon sign wasn't buzzing. The window AC unit wasn't rattling. The rusted ice machine outside was dead. Even the ambient, low-frequency hum of the world, the wind, the distant highway, the shifting of the earth, was gone. It was like he had been packed inside a giant crate of cotton. Arnie rubbed his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. He looked at the Zenith clock radio on the nightstand. The red LED digits glowed intensely in the gloom. 3:33. "Great!" Arnie muttered. The sound of his own voice shocked him. It didn't echo, it just dropped dead from his lips, absorbed instantly by the room. He stood up, his joints popping, and walked to the window. He parted the heavy, dust-caked curtains and looked out into the parking lot. The breath caught in his throat. The lot was empty. His Crown Victoria was gone. The rusted F-150, the muddy Peterbilt, the Dodge Caravan, all gone. But it was more than that. The world outside the window looked unfinished. The asphalt of the parking lot extended out to where the gravel shoulder should have been, but beyond that, the interstate was just a pale grey ribbon that seemed to dissolve into a wall of dense, static fog. There was no horizon. There were no stars. The sky was the colour of a blank television screen, tuned to a dead channel. The pink neon sign, the one that had been buzzing so angrily, was dark, the glass tubes looking like dead grey veins against the cinder block. "What the hell did they put in that bourbon?" Arnie whispered. He walked to the door, unlocked the deadbolt, unlatched the chain, and pulled it open. The air outside was perfectly still and smelled strongly of ozone and old dust, like the inside of a vacuum cleaner. It wasn't cold and it wasn't hot. It was room temperature, the exact temperature of human skin. Arnie stepped out onto the concrete walkway. He looked left, he looked right. The doors to the other rooms were all shut, their turquoise paint looking duller, leached of colour. "Hey!" Arnie yelled. The word left his mouth and vanished. No echo, no reverberation. He started walking toward the motel office, his stocking feet making no sound on the concrete. The sense of wrongness was building in his chest, a cold, heavy dread that was starting to squeeze his lungs. "This is a dream," he told himself, "a lucid dream. Too much booze, too much stress over the Pendleton case. You're asleep in 114. But he could feel the rough concrete through his socks. He could smell the ozone. It was too real. He reached the office. The fluorescent lights inside were off. The open sign was flipped to closed. Arnie grabbed the doorknob. It was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell of Folgers and pine sol was gone, replaced by that same dry metallic scent of nothingness. The old man was gone. Arnie walked behind the counter. The leather-bound ledger was still there. He opened it to the page he had signed earlier. His signature wasn't there. Arthur Pendleton's signature wasn't there. Instead, the page was filled with a single repetitive line, written over and over in a spidery, frantic script that dug deep into the paper, almost tearing it. "He is eating the miles. He is eating the miles. He is eating the miles." Arnie backed away from the book, his hand dropping to the butt of his .38. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, wake up now, Arnie. Time to wake up." He pinched the back of his arm hard. Pain flared, sharp and undeniable. He didn't wake up. He moved toward the back of the office. There was a wooden door behind the counter, slightly ajar. He pushed it open. It led to a small, cramped living quarter. A sagging armchair, a hot plate, a black-and-white television set, and in the corner, taking up most of the space, was an old, heavy wooden desk. On the desk sat a reel-to-reel tape recorder. It was a massive Wollensack from the 1960s, its brushed aluminum casing gleaming in the flat grey light. The reels were fully loaded with brown magnetic tape. Next to it was a framed black-and-white photograph. Arnie picked it up. It showed a man standing in front of the Midway Motel. The motel looked brand new in the picture, the neon sign blazing brightly. The man was tall, painfully thin, wearing a sharp suit and a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were dark, sunken pits that seemed to bore right through the glass of the frame. The brass nameplate on the bottom of the frame read, "Ilias Cobb, Founder, 1955. Arnie set the picture down. He looked at the tape recorder. It was plugged into a wall outlet. There was no power in the motel, but a small green indicator light on the machine was glowing. Arnie reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and pressed the heavy mechanical play button. The reels began to spin. A hiss of static filled the room, sounding obscenely loud in the absolute silence. Then a voice spoke. It was deep, resonant, and coated in a smooth, mid-Atlantic accent that sounded like an old radio broadcast. "July 14th, 1958, the voice said. "Ilias Cobb. The hypothesis is proven. The geometry of the American highway system is not merely a matter of logistics, it is an occult science. When you build a conduit of velocity, you generate kinetic energy. The millions of souls moving from point A to point B, they are in a state of transit. They are nowhere. They are in the in-between. Arnie stared at the spinning reels, mesmerized. I built the Midway precisely equidistant between two major hubs of human population. Cobb's voice continued, crackling with static. It is the exact fulcrum, a geographic purgatory, and when a weary traveller stops here, they bring that kinetic energy with them. Their forward momentum is halted. The energy must go somewhere. I have designed the foundation of this place to act as a capacitor. Arnie felt a sudden sharp pain in his head, a spike of pure agony behind his right eye. He winced, rubbing his temple. Suddenly an image flashed in his mind. He was a little boy. He was sitting on a yellow linoleum floor, pushing a toy dump truck back and forth. A woman with auburn hair, Janice, his wife Janice, was standing at the sink, washing dishes. Arnie gasped, stumbling backward and knocking into the armchair. "What the—" That wasn't his memory. He didn't have a wife named Janice. Arthur Pendleton had a wife named Janice. He looked at his hands. For a terrifying, fleeting second, they didn't look like his hands. They looked softer, the knuckles less battered, a gold wedding band gleaming on the left ring finger. Arnie didn't wear a ring. He blinked, shaking his head violently, and his own calloused bare hands returned. The tape kept playing. "The energy is delicious," Cobb's voice rasped. It sounded older now, the smooth accent fraying at the edges. "It sustains, but it is not enough to simply siphon the runoff. To truly capture the essence, the traveller must be entirely halted. They must be removed from the flow of time. Room 114 is the centre of the web, the anchor point. When the door closes, they do not wake up in America. They wake up in the battery." Arnie lunged forward and slammed his hand down on the stop button. The reels halted. The static died. The heavy silence rushed back in, crushing his eardrums. "The battery," Arnie whispered. He was in the battery, a localized temporal pocket, Cobb had called it. A liminal space carved out of reality to act as a stomach for a dead man's spell. And it was digesting him. It was breaking down his mind, mixing his memories with the psychic residue of everyone else who had been trapped here. Arthur Pendleton, the travelling salesman, the runaways, he had to get out. Arnie turned and ran out of the office. He burst through the front door and sprinted across the empty concrete walkway back toward room 114. As he ran, the grey fog that walled off the highway seemed to be creeping closer, contracting around the motel like a tightening noose. The cinder-block walls of the rooms seemed to be subtly shifting, the angles wrong, leaning inward. He reached the door of 114 and grabbed the handle. It was locked. "Damn it!" He frantically patted his pockets. The heavy brass key was gone. He had left it on the nightstand. He took a step back and kicked the door right next to the lock. The wood splintered, but the deadbolt held. He kicked it again, channeling every ounce of terror and adrenaline into his heel. The door burst open with a loud crack, rebounding off the interior wall. Arnie rushed in. The room was exactly as he had left it. The burnt-orange shag, the floral bedspread. The zenith clock radio read 3:33. Arnie grabbed the heavy television set and hurled it at the window. It shattered the glass and tore through the heavy curtains, but it didn't go outside. It hit something solid just beyond the window frame with a dull thud, and bounced back into the room, landing heavily on the carpet. Arnie looked through the broken glass. There was no parking lot outside the window anymore. There was only a wall of featureless grey matter, like solid smoke. The room was shrinking. The trap was closing. Find the anchor tying them to this liminal space. The tape had said room 114 was the centre of the web. The anchor point. Arnie fell to his knees. The burnt orange shag carpet felt wet and warm under his hands. It felt like living moss. He grabbed a handful of the long synthetic fibres and pulled. The carpet tore away with a sound like ripping flesh. Underneath was bare concrete, but it wasn't flat. There were grooves carved into the floor, symbols, intricate geometric patterns that hurt his eyes to look at, spirals and sharp angles that defied perspective. "Arthur," a woman's voice echoed in his head. "Arthur, please come home. We were going to Branson." "My name is Arnie," he screamed, his voice finally tearing through the silence, echoing harshly off the walls. "I'm Arnie Vance. I drink Evan Williams, and I drive a Ford, and I don't give a shit about Branson." He tore up more of the carpet, tossing massive heavy strips of it behind him. The symbols converged in the centre of the room, right under where the bed used to be. Arnie shoved the heavy mattress and box spring aside with superhuman, panicked strength. In the centre of the concrete floor, nestled within a carved depression, was the anchor. It was a rusted, heavy-duty car battery, the kind used for large trucks. But instead of jumper cables attached to the terminals, there were thick, dark veins, actual organic veins, pulsing with sluggish black blood that snaked out from the battery and vanished into the concrete floor. Wrapped around the battery, functioning as a crude casing, was a cage of yellowed bone. Human ribs. The battery was humming. It was the only sound in the world, a low, hungry thrum. Arnie stared at it, horror threatening to snap his sanity in half. He could hear voices coming from the battery, hundreds of voices murmuring in a panicked, endless loop. "Just pulling over for a nap. Honey, the map says. Got to make Denver by morning. Where am I? Janice." Arthur Pendleton was in there, his energy, his essence, squeezed into a necrotic battery to power the ghost of Elias Cobb. And Arnie was being pulled in to join him. He could feel his own memories fraying. He couldn't remember his mother's face, couldn't remember the colour of his own eyes. All he could see was Janice crying in his office. No, my office, Arnie's office. Arnie drew his Smith & Wesson .38. He gripped it with both hands, aiming it down at the battery. "Check out time," Arnie grunted. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot in the silent room was deafening, a physical blow to the head. The bullet struck the heavy plastic casing of the battery. Acid hissed and spat, bubbling up through the crack. The room screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was the sound of tearing metal and rushing wind, the agonizing shriek of a vacuum seal breaking. Arnie fired again and again. He emptied the cylinder into the bone cage and the battery, blowing chunks of yellow marrow and black pulpy acid across the concrete. The world tilted. The grey light began to violently strobe, flashing between blinding white and pitch black. The floor beneath Arnie buckled. The geometric symbols etched into the concrete began to glow a furious, searing red. He felt himself falling, tumbling through a vortex of roaring noise. The sound of 18-wheelers, the blasting of horns, the static of AM radio stations, the crying of children in back seats, the collective roar of the American highway. It washed over him, drowning him, crushing him, and then he hit the floor. Arnie gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was lying on his back. The burnt-orange shag carpet was under him, smelling of dust and stale cigarettes. He sat up, his head spinning, nausea rolling through his gut. The room was dark, illuminated only by the rhythmic bleeding pink glow coming through the window. Bzzzt! Bzzzt! The neon sign was on. Arnie looked at the nightstand. The zenith clock radio read 3:34 a.m. He was breathing hard, drenched in a cold sweat. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the aching protest of his muscles, and staggered to the window. He yanked the curtains back. Outside, a heavy rain was falling. The gravel lot was filled with puddles reflecting the pink neon. His 2003 Crown Victoria was sitting exactly where he had parked it, water beading on the hood. Beyond the lot, a massive semi-truck roared past on I-80, its tyres hissing violently on the wet asphalt, its red taillights streaking into the distance. The world was loud. The world was moving. Arnie looked down at his hands. They were his hands. Battered knuckles, no wedding ring. He looked at the floor in the centre of the room. The carpet was intact. No torn shag, no carved concrete, no pulsing battery of bone and acid. Arnie grabbed his trench coat and his bag. He didn't bother packing his flask. He unlocked the door and practically fell out into the rain. The cold, wet air hit him like a baptism. He drank it in huge, ragged gulps. He ran to his car, threw his bag in the passenger seat over the manila folder with Arthur Pendleton's face on it, and jammed the key into the ignition. The V8 engine roared to life, a beautiful mechanical symphony. Arnie slammed the car into reverse, tyres spinning in the mud, and threw it into drive. He didn't look back at the office. He didn't look to see if the old man with the lazy eye was watching him from the dark. He hit the on-ramp for I-80, going 80 miles an hour, his tyres hydroplaning slightly before catching the pavement. He drove east toward the rising sun, pushing the speedometer up to 90-95, fleeing the exact middle of nowhere. He didn't turn on the radio. He just listened to the engine, the wind and the tyres. He was Arnie Vance. He was alive. But as the miles ate themselves under his tyres and the sky began to turn a bruised pre-dawn purple, he couldn't shake the smell of White Diamond's perfume in his nose. And sometimes, when he glanced in the rearview mirror, just for a fraction of a second, the eyes looking back at him were apologetic, weak and terrified. "We were going to Branson," a voice whispered in the hum of the tyres. Arnie gripped the wheel tighter, stared at the road ahead, and kept driving until the gas gauge hit empty.
Thank you for watching. Please check out our Patreon and do support us on Patreon if you can. We will see you in the next video. Bye.